Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking something super fascinating, a massive 10,000-word address delivered at the Enthronement Assembly. It is essentially an in-depth leadership and spiritual framework that details the absolute requirements for service within their church structure. We're going to distill this vast presentation down to its core architecture, just to see exactly what makes this organization tick.
So to really get why this address leans so heavily into intense dedication, you've kind of got to look at the sheer scale of what they're doing. The speaker drops this detail about a recent testimony where 3.95 million naira was just swiftly committed to a single member-led concert vision. I mean, when you're moving resources and organizing people at that kind of magnitude, casual participation just doesn't cut it. They literally need highly dedicated, rigorously aligned workers.
Okay, let's dive into this. The whole thing is anchored by one specific passage from the book of Hebrews. The speaker takes this idea of a divine shaking to explain all these volatile dynamics: church leadership, volunteer retention, spiritual endurance, the whole shebang. Basically, everything we're about to explore stems from this one central idea, that spiritual environments are actively being tested.
We've grouped the speaker's 7 core principles into 5 logical themes. 1. The foundation of shaking. 2. Serving a consuming fire. 3. The immovable kingdom. 4. Reverence and acceptable service. And 5. The power of grace.
Section 1. The foundation of shaking. And this brilliantly illustrates how the source material views organizational turnover. They explain that spiritual environments go through these purposeful shakings. So during these systemic stress tests, maybe it's an internal conflict, a hardship, or just a really heavy demand, the shakeable workers are separated and removed. But here's the catch. The organization doesn't see this as a loss. No, they see it as a necessary purification to find the unshakable workers that they're actually going to build their future on.
Now, to explain this internal conflict, the speaker redefines a theological term that can sometimes be a bit confusing. When they talk about an antichrist here, they're not talking about some apocalyptic movie villain. Actually, they define it literally as an anti-anointing spirit. It basically represents everyday human opposition coming from right within the church ranks, people who eventually reveal themselves by just up and leaving. It's definitely a striking way to frame dissent.
Which brings us to one of the most striking quotes from the entire address: "The resignation is a revelation." See, the speaker actively trains the leadership not to mourn departures. If someone leaves, you don't beg them to stay. Their leaving is viewed as a revelation that they were, shakeable to begin with, and therefore just not meant for the next phase of the organization's growth.
Section 2. Serving a consuming fire.
Here, the address shifts focus from the workers to the formidable nature of the deity they are serving, described as a consuming fire. Because of this, the core argument is that service cannot be arbitrary. It can't just be based on what a worker prefers, or their secular knowledge, or even their own good ideas. The speaker heavily emphasizes brokenness, which they define as the strict ability to function exactly as commanded by God. Literally anything else is considered unauthorized.
To vividly illustrate just how dangerous unauthorized service can be, the speaker brings up the biblical story of Nadab and Abihu. These guys offered strange fire, meaning service that wasn't commanded. The result? They were literally devoured by fire. But the speaker points out a much deeper judgment here. They had no children. So the stark takeaway for the worker is this: if you offer unauthorized service or messages, your ministry is going to suffer a total lack of reproductivity and growth.
Section 3. The immovable kingdom.
So the crucial point is, having established how easily individuals can be shaken, the speaker emphasizes that this organization views itself as having absolutely no indispensable human pillars. None. No single worker, no matter how talented, no branch pastor, and no major financial donor is holding the church up. The speaker makes it clear that if anyone starts to feel like a pillar, the system will eventually prove to them that the kingdom will march on perfectly fine without them.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it frames the psychology of a dedicated worker. The speaker notes that after a massively successful conference, the most mind-blowing realization wasn't a success itself, but the fact that it was achieved without certain people who were previously thought to be completely essential. It demands a lot of deep humility. When you serve, you have to realize you're a privileged participant, not a critical necessity.
But if the organization doesn't actually need you, and your own personal ideas for service aren't allowed, well, it begs a pretty important question. What actually makes your service acceptable to this immovable kingdom?
Section 4.
reverence, and acceptable service.
Because the deity is viewed as being capable of instantly humbling kings, not all service is accepted. It's just like how the biblical Abel offered his absolute best and Cain's offering was rejected. Workers have to give their prime efforts. Think about your secular job for a second. The speaker argues that you shouldn't offer God the leftover time or effort that you wouldn't dare offer an earthly boss. Simply put, only the absolute best is accepted.
Section 5. The Power of Grace. So, facing all these intense requirements, surviving shakings, acting strictly as commanded, offering flawless service, how does a worker actually sustain this? Well, the core thesis here is that human effort and willpower alone, they're completely insufficient for fulfilling these spiritual offices. The speaker argues you can't just try hard enough to be a good pastor or leader. It requires a specific supernatural fuel, which they identify as grace.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a practical methodology to avoid pastoral burnout. First, you have to occupy the assigned office. Second, you trust that there is a specific grace allocated just for that role. And third, and this is a very strategic point, you actively honor and learn from the people who previously broke the ground in that specific territory or role. By doing that, you essentially connect to their established grace.
So let's pull all of this together. The source text explicitly names 7 things every worker must know, and here they are distilled. 1. Expect shakings to reveal the unshakable. 2. Intimately know the consuming fire you serve. 3. Realize the kingdom needs no pillars. 4. Serve with intense reverence. 5. Keep your focus entirely on God, not men. 6. Ensure your service is qualitative and acceptable. And 7. Rely completely on the grace assigned to your office.
Ultimately, this framework presents a really rigorous, uncompromising vision of spiritual service. It challenges workers to completely strip away their ego and rely entirely on a higher system. So, based on everything we've unpacked from this address today, you really have to ask yourself, in your own areas of dedication and service, are you building on what is shakeable or what is unshakable?